I wonder if we can go back.
Okay.
And I can take you back to the writing of Always Running.
Mm-hmm.
When was that book published?
Well, 93 came out.
1993.
Yeah.
Okay, 500,000 copies sold of this book, is that?
Probably a little bit more by now, but yeah, 500,000 copies, yeah.
Okay. And it made you famous. That book made you famous.
Yeah, it did, yeah.
But some here still haven't read it. And it's about your life. It's about gang life in LA. I wonder if you can take us back just for a moment and describe to us what gang life was like as you describe it in that book compared to what gang life in LA is like today.
Well, here's one thing I tell people. In the late 60s and 70s, it wasn't lightweight gangs. It was heavy duty, very violent, very complicated gangs, but it wasn't everybody. You see what I'm saying? So what happened by the 90s, everybody was in a gang. I hope you know what I'm saying. It became a big deal. There was gangs everywhere. People were emulating gangs, people were creating gangs. People were just Bloods and Crips was everywhere, Sureño gangs were everywhere.
Korean, Vietnamese.
Everybody was, Armenians, everybody was in gangs. And so I think it just spread out, and it spread out around the country. So LA gangs was actually the #1 gang structures around the US.
Right.
Because you found them in New York City, you found them in other cities. So it just got bigger.
In other countries.
MS-13. Well, actually, the bigger one, it's not even MS-13, is 18th Street.
Right.
They're in more countries than MS-13. But anyway, the point is, we were heavy-duty gangsters, but it wasn't that many people. You know what I'm saying? We didn't even want that many people. In those days, people wanted to join our gang. We were like, get the hell out of here.
You're talking late 60s,
early 60s, early 70s.
Yeah.
You had to prove yourself. You had to be somebody that you could say, you could be jumped in.
Right.
But what was happening is they were jumping in everybody, anybody. I want to join the gang. I don't even know if you knew these people. Like I was with Chicago gangs, they have similar gangs too. They have these super gangs, the Latin Kings, recruit thousands of people. We don't even know them. And yet they joined the Latin Kings or the Gangster Disciples or the Vice Lords. There was all these gangs that were doing the same thing. They were getting spread out. So that's the difference. Not that it was harder in the 90s, it just got more widespread.
Okay. Because I know the era you grew up in, where were you during your teenage years?
So it was the San Gabriel Valley, and it was, people don't know, we used to call it the Valley of Death because in that time, the San Gabriel Valley had 100 migrant communities. All of them were barrios, and the barrios spawned all the gangs. So you had Monte Flores, and you had Sangra, and you had Lomas, and you had La Puente, and you had Pico Nuevo, Pico Viejo. You had hundreds of them all over the San Gabriel Valley.
They weren't all just Mexican, were they ethnic?
They were almost all Mexican. Almost all Mexican, because these were the migrant communities that used to work the oranges and the walnuts and the cherries, whatever they were. Now they were all white suburbs, at least when I was there, surrounding these migrant poor Mexican communities. And when I say migrant poor, you may not have an idea about this, but it was extremely poor. There was no sidewalks, there was no dirt streets, there was goats and chickens in people's backyards, there was little shacks, really poor shacks. And yet you were surrounded by people with sidewalks and strip malls and movie theaters. And we were at war with the white people that were living around there that used the sheriff's deputies as their army against us. That's the way we looked at it. But also with other barrios, other migrant neighborhoods, other gangs from our own neighborhoods. And again, it was all Mexican. The Asian population was there, but not as big as happened in the 80s and 90s. That's when everything changed in the San Gabriel Valley.
Yeah, they sort of migrated out from Chinatown and other places.
All the white people left, though. I mean, you know what? People don't know San Gabriel Valley right now is 70% Mexican, Central American, and I know it's like, wow, you think it'd be more Asian. It actually is more like 20% Asian. People don't know that. It's still...
In SGV now.
Yeah, but it used to be almost all white. I don't know if you're aware of it, how it changed. The white flight was very quick and fast, and now it's just... It's a person of color community, even though there's levels of wellness and that are compared to others.
Right. Yeah, white flight kind of kept going, like David Ulin describes it. This and then kind of inverted it into gentrification.
Yeah.
No.
Now they're going into inner cities that they abandoned before. Yeah.
Right. We haven't mentioned so far black gangs yet, but I'm curious,
Yeah.
on that vein,
Yeah.
do you remember the Watts riots?
I do. I was 11 years old. I lived in Watts, first community moved to from Mexico. I was 2 years old to 8 years old.
Yeah.
But we had moved out. And then when I was about 11 years old, 65, yeah, I was 11 years old, I saw my community, that community that I was in, burning. And people don't know, Watts was always black and Mexican. People always say it's black community. Yes, it is. But it was all LA had Mexicans next to black people. People always take that away. I don't know why. Pacoima was black and Mexican. Compton, black and Mexican. And now you have to have Central Americans. In other words, it wasn't all just black. South Central was black and Mexican. Now there was sections of streets that was mostly black and sections of streets that was mostly Mexican or Central American, but it was always black and brown. And yet whenever I hear the stories of the narrative, they take out the brown part. I don't know why. These were black and brown communities. It's like people talk about hip hop. You all know hip hop. You know where it started? South Bronx. And you know that it was black and brown people that started it? But you wouldn't know that if all you went was in pop culture. You'd think it was just black people. It was black African Americans, it was West Indies African descended people, and it was Puerto Ricans and Dominicans. That's what started hip hop. But what I have a problem with them taking out the brown part. I don't know why they do that. Urban culture in the last, who knows how many generations, at least the last two or three generations has been black and brown. But the pop culture tends to take the brown part out. I don't know why. It's just one of those things. Maybe because they can't see, they don't know how to put brown people. You know what I'm saying? Black and white makes sense. And if you're Asian or you're Latino, they don't know how to put you in it properly. So they don't know how to, so they just keep a black and brown for the longest time.
Well, that's interesting. Yeah, and we get those hard binaries. I mean, if anything in this country, race is probably our primary dilemma in the history
it is.
of
And so it's with blacks always like at the bottom. So then that determines everything else. So sometimes it's hard to fit anybody else in that. Where people don't know that some of the biggest hip hop dancers, for example, are Filipino. And worldwide, they become very big. And that hip hop is spoken in all kinds of languages, including Mayan languages, including Quechua from Peru, including Asian languages that you don't even know. In other words, it's a worldwide phenomenon that's hitting everybody.
That's interesting, and as it relates to race and these hard binaries, this class is at UCLA is called Sociology of Crime, and we've been exploring how if the victim is a primary model of that's elevated of American identity, sort of the victim, you've got to have the reverse. You've got to have a perpetrator. You've got to have a criminal, right? Somebody who's committed the crime, who's created the victim. So you have both of those sort of swirling around. So we like these hard binaries. But we've been talking a lot about crime and sort of establishing this. Historians often will describe crime in two ways: as ordinary crimes, things like robbery, even
burglaries,
murder, things like this.
And organized and
And so this would be sort of the everyday crimes. You guys remember this, and extraordinary crimes. Now, I think, and I was just thinking about this morning, that perhaps the Rodney King, or extraordinary crimes are those big crimes that really do reshape the system, the criminal justice system. Whereas, ordinary crimes can have, if you know that there are a lot of burglaries happening in this particular neighborhood, police can, they can, whatever. It'll shape still the criminal justice system, but not like, you get more police, even redlining. It does that gradually, but not like the shockwave of extraordinary crimes. Now, I want to, so again, maybe Rodney King, but I want to talk about LA, not just Rodney King, but I want to talk about perhaps an extraordinary crime that's not on the books, but it's in your poem. I want to talk about water.
Oh, yeah.
And perhaps that is LA's original sin, right? That
water theft.
Water theft and water right.
Yeah.
I wonder if you could talk about that crime.
Well, let me talk about it by putting it this way. I think that the way capitalism is, there's legal ways of making money, which is not that much different than illegal ways. You understand what I'm getting at? It's not that much different except that it's legalized. They make the laws first that allow certain things to happen. But they end up doing stuff like stealing, theft, even murdering people. I hope you understand what I'm saying, but if it's legal and if it's okay and it's within the bounds of whatever the society says, it's okay. The shadow of that is that people do this in the illegal means. You can kill people in this country if you're legally supposed to. I hope you know what I'm talking about. And if you're not, and you don't got that given thing and you kill somebody, then you're likely to end up in prison. Whereas if not, this is why police were given the power of life and death over certain communities. They literally had that. And no matter, and now it's all way people waking up to it, Black Lives Matter and everything, but it used to be where they could kill people and nobody could complain, nobody could do nothing. I lost 4 friends unarmed to police violence. There was no recourse. That's just part, the police had the power to do that.
And we do have a history, of course, of federally sanctioned slaughtering of Native Indians. But what about...
Yeah. And all that's my story. It's like it starts off with the Native peoples, take their land, and it got legalized. You can do homesteading, you can do all kinds of things. And then they started legalizing, taking removals and all this stuff. And then same with slavery. Once slavery became the way things were done, you could legally do anything to any human being. And then when they were escaping, then you had the Fugitive Slave Act, which also got the whole country involved. In other words, you legalize these terrible things, it's okay. It's not okay if it's not part of the legal thing. So to me, the crimes in the shadow part is reflective of what I would call crimes, but even though nobody else would call it, in the other part. You know what I'm saying? If they allow certain people to do certain things, like steal people's lands, steal their minerals, steal their labor, water, all the stuff, then the shadow side is reflective of something that is allowed, but yet it does the same thing. Hope I'm making sense. When you got power, you can do this. And when you don't got power, this is what you do. And that's what I break it down to. I'm not justifying any of it. You know, I think human beings shouldn't do none of that. But the point is, that's what we end up doing. You know.
Now you identify as a native person. Do you see Los Angeles ever making amends for that original sin, original crime? We call it crime or sin.
I don't see it happening. Only I was really pleased that not that long ago we changed Columbus Day in LA and made it Indigenous Peoples Day. We were one of the first cities. I just found out that Chicago just did that the other day. So it's becoming the way to look at it. In other words, it's recognizing that there was a terrible, terrible death, and you can't honor the man that helped open that door. You can't, because he was one of those guys. He played a big role in the water death. One of the things about the Owens Valley that people don't know, the Owens Valley used to be just mostly Native peoples, and it was very beautiful and green. I don't know if you know about this. It's extremely green and beautiful because the Native peoples had a way of thinking that you only take what you need. You never give more than you always give back what you take. Yeah, and you never take more than you need. So it kept green. Developers came in there and said, these people are wasting the land. So then they got rid of them, and then they started taking the water, and then, you know, if you go to the Owens Valley, it's horrible, dry. It's lost all its greenery, you know what I'm saying?
They're still taking it from the ground.
Yeah, so yeah.
Okay, so now I want to sort of push back on this though a little bit, because in your poem, so many beautiful lines. LA is a city without a handle. I love that. I think about that every day when I'm just driving around this place. And you also say that, of course, that last line, that it's this city, Los Angeles, lined with those majestic palm trees, which the city of LA is not going to plant any more of, officially, because, look, they take a lot of water. They're
not even
no fruit,
and they're not even part of our ecosystem.
They're not indigenous. They're imports. They provide no shade.
Yeah.
Right, which we're going to need pretty quickly here as things start to get warmer. So a lot of water, and you feed into the myth.
Well, I feed into it because it is a myth. I feed into it because there's what people think about LA is kind of like the transplant of the palm trees. There's a transplant of people. The only ones that can't say they're transplanted are the indigenous people who have been pushed out and are made strangers in their own land, which is really what the bad thing. Yeah, but what happened is that's what we become. We become palm trees. I don't know if I'm making sense. It's because I'm feeding into the myth, but the myth is that this is where LA, it's not really LA, but that's all we all become. So there's a layer of LA that's kind of made up. I hope people are following me. It's kind of a made up world that people have created on top of it, and that's what we become. But one of the things I also want to point out in contrast to that, palm trees are very sturdy when it comes to being in the ground. Yeah, they do take a lot of water and everything. It takes a
solid roots, supple trunks.
The winds, every once in a while they knock them down, but hardly. Yeah. All the winds coming through here, rains, everything, most palm trees stay up. So there's also something there that I see is with the people of LA. I think there's resiliency in the people, and I think there's something deep, in everyone that comes here. And that's what I love about LA. Even if you come from other parts of the world, you start getting a certain depth and creative depth in LA that I found very fascinating.
Creative depth, and I love how LA's inclusivity is wrapped up in those lines that you have.
Yeah.
I mean, people can be reciting that poem several hundred years from now.
Yeah.
But
even without palm trees around.
Yeah, there'll probably still be some around there. Yeah. But as we're talking about LA, you mentioned another line in that poem is that this is still a one industry town.
Yeah.
With everything here, everybody here, every industry here, and still a one industry town. I wonder if we could talk about, and it was mentioned recently in some of the Academy Award winners mentioning not only the whiteness of the Academy, but also the neglect. And I think the Tarantino movie on Hollywood, the recent film, Brad Pitt highlights that a lot of the stunt workers, the workers. I wonder if we could talk about the workers in that industry. And
well, my son's one of them, the one that went to prison. He works in a Hollywood company that does sets for people. He's a driver, and they bring stuff into the different whatever they're filming. They hired these felons, and they're doing good work. They're working hard. And so he loves it. He's part of the Hollywood world now in a different level, but he's one of these workers that helps Hollywood get going, but nobody knows them. They're not in front of the camera. They're not even behind the camera. They're just the ones that get all the stuff done. So Hollywood, to me, is the one industry town that kind of lets us forget that we actually have the largest manufacturing center in the whole country. People don't know that about LA. We have more manufacturing than Chicago, than Detroit, than Pittsburgh. But a lot of that industry left too. We lost a lot of industry in the 80s, starting around that time. South Central, for all the community that is there was a lot of good industry in the sense people had jobs, they made good money. And by the 80s, I know I was there when the Goodyear plants went down, when the JM plant in Southgate went down, when the Bethlehem Steel plant at Slauson went down. I was there when it all vanished. I used to work in those places. I was one of these guys that worked in that industry. I worked as a welder, pipe fitter. I was a mechanic, and those industries was leaving. And
no jobs.
No jobs. Aerospace and garment. We had one of the largest garment industries in the world. And it's almost all gone, except for little shops here and there. So people don't realize how much we lost. They talk about the Rust Belt. We were part of the Rust Belt. We weren't in the Rust Belt. We were bigger than the Rust Belt. So people didn't pay attention to that. This is why by '92, when the uprising happened, you can see that people lost their jobs, lost their ability to survive. Police got more money and became more impressive. You can see it was the ingredients for another uprising because that's what they had developed.
And the crime bill, of course, came in just a couple years later to try to clamp down on that further.
Yeah.
But also provided services, and we'll get to this in a minute. But I wonder if we could talk about and sort of what's happening in LA today. But I wonder if we could talk about your book, your new book, which is, as mentioned, the only extra credit assignment in this class for this, where students will read. I've given them the option of reading several chapters from it: The End of Belonging, The Four Key Connections, Prickly Pear Cactus, Monsters of our own making, Men's Tears, and The Story of Our Day. Those are the chapters that they could be reading for extra credit. But this book is titled, and it's a series of essays. It's called From Our Land to Our Land. And I wonder if, as we think about that title, and it goes on, it says this is the sort of additional subtitle is Essays, Journeys, and Imaginings from a Native Chicanx Writer. And you use the X at the beginning of that and the X at the end of that. But I wonder if we could talk about, first of all, from our land to our land. Yeah. I wonder if we could talk about how law and crime and justice can, which are themes in this class, can better be conceived in this land.
Yeah, because here's what happened. Slavery's gone, but people still treated badly. A lot of other things are gone, but things aren't right. Now Native peoples got the reservations, but those are not just beautiful places. I would do a lot of work in reservations. So a lot of injustice is still going on, but now that stuff is gone. But guess what they started adding now is with the border. The border was a created thing. It's only been around for, 150 years, whatever it is.
A strong immigration bill 96 in this country?
That was a big one under
10
Clinton.
years after Reagan.
Yeah, and that was Clinton, So what happened is they made the border, they militarized the border. And the bad thing about that is you got Mexican tribal people and U.S. tribal people who have connections, who have family connections that are affected by this border. So my mother's family is from the Tarahumara tribe of Chihuahua, Mexico. Anybody know about the Tarahumara? You should look them up. They're all over the internet. They're known as one of the fastest runners in the world. They do marathons, and they do it with their tire sandals. They don't do it with the Nikes or anything, and they beat everybody. The only ones they don't beat is the Kenyans, because the Kenyans are actually faster than anybody. But anyway, they're known for that, and they have 6 canyons in the Chihuahua, southern Chihuahua, one of them is at least deeper than the Grand Canyon. And I was there. I've been there. I've walked among them. They live in caves. There was about 80,000 living in caves when I visited it. One of the few cave dwellers in the world. People don't know about this. These are Native people. They don't speak Spanish. They're not Catholicized. They're Native peoples. That tribe is related to the Pueblos, to the Hopi, to the Shoshone, to the Paiute, to the California tribes. There's a Ute Azteca linguistic thing that they're all tied to. But the border comes, and guess what? My mother, who's Tarahumara, has me born in El Paso. We live in Ciudad Juarez, Mexico. She went across the international bridge, and it's all part of the Chihuahua Desert. You understand what I'm getting at? El Paso, parts of New Mexico, and Chihuahua, and I think part of Sonora, have the Chihuahua Desert. Those people have been there for at least 10,000 years. But now with the border, we don't belong. Now we're aliens. You hear what I'm saying? Now we're strangers. But I'm saying we went from our land to our land. Hope you understand what I'm getting at. 10,000 years to me means more than the last 150 years, whenever that was. Even though my mother and my dad were treated like foreigners. So I have an issue of making us immigrants. We're not immigrants, we're migrants, like people around the world. And I'm not against any other migrant from around the world. I'm just saying you got to understand our ties to Native peoples and Native lands is as deep as anyone's. And if you work with Native Americans, and I do a lot of work with them, many recognize that. They understand that. There's now powwows of Mexicas, which is Mexicans from central Mexico and other tribes, doing dance now with Native Americans. There's Native American reservations and tribes that now adopt Mexicans as members of their tribe. The Navajo have the Mexican clan. You know, they have all these clan systems. There's a Mexican clan, Nakai Dene, and that's them accepting the Mexicans because of intermarriage. In other words, some people recognize that Mexicans are not from Spain, they're not from Europe, they're not from other parts of the world, they are from this land. Even if we're mixed in with stuff, everybody's mixed up with stuff. Native Americans are some of the most mixed up people. I've worked with some wonderful, amazing, blue-eyed Indians. I worked with some beautiful, amazing African mixed Indian people. They're still Native, you know. So Mexicans have that. And then of course Mexico has the largest number of actual tribal people in the whole continent. The numbers are greater than any other country. Per capita, Guatemala and Peru might have more indigenous people, but Mexico has the largest number of them.
This is fascinating, and especially is massively significant for a key theme in this class and how crime is conceived culturally. right?
Yeah.
Especially when you have the imposition of laws that are meant to reflect the culture, but the question is
Yeah.
which culture? So this class, it's
Yeah.
a conglomeration of explorations into law, into
Yeah.
race, into prisons, into
Yeah.
prosecution, into religion,
Yeah, yeah.
and the relationship of how all these things
Yeah.
set the tone for how crime is culturally conceived. That poses several questions about how do we keep doing this in this land? How do we, when people talk about criminal justice reform,
Yeah.
how does that even happen in relationship to who have been conceived as
Yeah.
criminals?
So the whole book is really a vision for a new country. I really want to imagine a new America. I have to. I can't just accept everything that America has become to this day. Now, people have said, well, why don't you go to another country? I've heard this a lot of times. Says, I don't have to go anywhere else. This is my land. You understand what I'm getting at? This is my country. And I have a lot to say about it. And I'm not going to go anyplace else to do that. I'm going to do it here. And because I have these indigenous ties, I feel that I'm not going to leave anything. I'm going to stay here. Yes, it's tied in with Mexico too. And I'm very concerned what happens in Mexico, but I'm really concerned with what happens here. So I feel there has to be a new imagination. And the imagination has to be more encompassing. Prison is one of the worst things we've ever created as a country. It does not work. I'm sure you're aware of this. It does not do what it's supposed to do. Everything that it's supposed to do actually does the opposite. Since they started building more prisons, more crime has been the result. The gangs in LA, like I said, when I was involved 60s and 70s, there was 15 prisons for 15,000 prisoners. Since that time, the highest level of prisons in California, 175,000 with 34 prisons. And gangs got worse. LA gangs are all over the country. They're spread out in other parts of the world. You got LA gangs all over Central America, Mexico, and other parts actually. So it's like they made it worse for everybody. This doesn't make it any better. You don't punish crime. You don't punish the criminal elements out. I hope I'm making sense. It doesn't work to punish people unless, especially when they're adults. Kids even worse. You don't work that way. If you commit crimes, if you're troubled, if you need a lot of help, you should have a lot of resources at your disposal. You should be given tools, knowledge, connections, whatever you need to get through it. That's not the way it works. And I know because I've been active for 40 years. I've been going to prisons, teaching, doing poetry, doing healing circles, 40 years. One thing you should know, the California prison system is 80% people of color. And we're not nowhere near that in the state. The largest single group is Chicano, about 40%, which is closer to the population in the state. African Americans are the most disproportionate because they're about 30 to 35% when their population numbers are like 16%. In other words, way beyond. The whites and Asians are, for their numbers, are far less than their population. So something's going on here. Because that's what people have to look at. What is going on and why does the prison system reflect that? I teach at a Lancaster prison every Monday. I go in 2 yards, both high security yards. One of them is the general population. This is the highest security yard before you get to the shoes. This is the highest security. Before I got there, 13 years ago, there was riots, there was lockdowns, there was all these terrible things. We started doing programming. Now, I was one of the first people to come in to do programming at Lancaster. Now there's a lot of programming. All of that has gone down. I hope you understand. The violence has gone down. The drug use has gone down. It's not perfect. Every once in a while things happen. And I'm not saying that everything's great. I'm just saying that when people were given opportunities to go to college, to get some skills, to learn, they took all the weight, so you can't do any weightlifting anymore. So now it's like, develop your brain maybe, okay. So they're doing much better. They really are better. And even the guards have recognized it. Before they were my biggest problem. They would say, why do you come here? Why do you bother? Now they're friendly to me. I'm glad you're here. They help me out. These guards. So it's changed, and that to me is what's important. Can we imagine a way to deal with human beings that does not mean locking them up, putting them away, throwing away the key, and just making them worse than when they came in?
Now, this vision that you communicated, I do remember when you can still do push-ups, of course.
Yeah. No, they still work. They still work out. They still work out.
I saw the pull-ups in Folsom and the guys running around. I was visiting that recently. But you also, with this vision, was it once upon a time, not too long ago, you actually took some of this vision in a political direction,
Yeah.
running for governor.
Yeah.
If you had gotten, you got a lot of votes, and you would have
Surprisingly.
been the first and only,
Surprisingly.
Mexican governor that we've ever had.
Well, probably not since the 1800s, probably. Yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
Fair. And certainly before we were an American state.
Right.
So 1850. But
Yeah.
I wonder if we could talk about politics for a minute, and especially politics as it relates to not just California and this vision. And I love how what you're describing. Kevin Starr would often talk about. He would triangulate he lived in San Francisco, but he worked in Sacramento as state librarian and taught at USC. So in his books, he would sign Kevin Starr. San Francisco, Sacramento, Los Angeles, and people would ask him, "Where do you live?" He would say, "I live in a city called California." It was a beautiful vision, I think, and some of that I think you pick up as well with different ways that we can better make life here that's more meaningful, related to work, related to education, resources. We're not all at the same place socioeconomically, so how can we be more just, more?
Well, and let me just tell you, I do not believe that the Republican or Democrat have much imagination. I find them to be very stuck, both of them. I think all political parties in this country and probably around the world are in crisis. And I think all religions are, which I think is not a bad thing necessarily, because the essence of all of them begin to rise up while everything falls on the side. What wasn't essential can't hold. So I find that that's a good thing. Everything's in crisis for a reason.
Go back to the well.
Yeah, we got to go back to the well, and that's where we're at. So I think my campaign was called Imagine a New California. That was what it was. It's like, I can't do a Democratic or Republican thing. I have to imagine a whole new way to go. You know what I'm saying? I'm not saying there's not good things in either one of them, but I have to imagine a new way that can take the best of all of them and or create a new path. And it actually, with no money, Governor Brown had $20 million at the primary. There was 15 people running at the time. And I didn't have no money, but I went up and down the state a dozen times. I talked to a lot of people. I ended up getting 5th out of 15 people and 1st among all the independents and third party people. And I also beat Governor Brown in the border precincts. and I was 2nd in San Francisco.
They don't usually like him down here in the South.
Yeah, I know. They don't really, but and he wasn't the worst governor in the world, but it was, again, not very imaginative that I felt. But I'll tell you one thing that happened. I got like 70,000 votes. You're not going to win nothing in California with 70,000 votes, but that's something considering 70,000 people thought I was worth voting for. And maybe it was my name. Who knows how they do it? But the thing that got to me was that Brown actually picked up some of my issues after that. People didn't pay attention. He started talking about poverty when he never used to. He started talking about prison reform in a different way. And he was doing something that he wasn't doing before. He was commuting a lot of guys that had been in prison, some life without possibly parole, but were doing very good because of programming. He started commuting a lot of guys. And people were like amazed that he was taking on these issues differently than he had before. I think, again, maybe not. I think it had to do with what I was doing, what I was saying. So even though I didn't get nowhere, nobody knows who I am, I didn't win nothing, it didn't matter. I think I laid down some ideas that I felt had some fruit.
And you do vote? You're still involved?
I'm still involved. I still vote. I voted just for the Super Tuesday already. Before Super Tuesday, I'm going to revote it.
You want to tell us who you voted?
Well, I don't mind telling you guys, I'm very supportive of the direction that Bernie Sanders is going. Now people say, well, why would you do that? Well, I don't think there's a really great, amazing candidate in any of them. I just feel that Bernie Sanders, and there's problems with Bernie Sanders like anybody else, but I just feel he's consistently carrying on the issues that I'm interested in more than anybody else. I feel that everybody's pandering in some level. I mean, Bernie Sanders, for whatever you think about him, he's been saying the same thing for 40 years. And you know what's happening is now, 40 years later, other people are starting to realize a lot of what he's saying is making sense. Now,
seems more just, more consistent with the just.
Yeah, he's got problems, like everybody. And people say, well, he's really not that great. Of course he's not. I wasn't that great, But the point is, you got to think about where things are going. I think he's more going in the direction that I would be more interested in. I would If it was me, I would go even further than him. But that's not the point. The point is he's going that way. So that's where I'm leaning towards, Bernie Sanders. Yeah.
So now back to this. I mean, you identify in the book, of course, on the cover, yourself as a Chicano writer with the X and the X at the beginning and end. And I wonder if we could talk about pros and cons, no pun intended, about using labels like these. I mean, I get it, beyond the binaries, the gender binaries, the whatever other binaries that might be out. And you write about this in one of the essays. But I mean, what if it's like, and the things we're talking about in this country, what if this country goes really conservative in the next 10 to 20 years, and in a really conservative direction, not just politically, but in this way where everyone who uses these labels with their gender inclusivity or whatever the move is beyond the binaries, and what if this label's no longer, what if it becomes sort of, I mean, anyone who uses any, and maybe it's not just this label, but what about labels, right, left, Democrat, Republican, and using these labels, pros and cons of these? I mean, what if now using these is no longer eligible for federal funding?
Absolutely.
Can't find work?
So here's what I would say about that. I'm not trying to be politically correct. I don't care if people use this label ever again. That's not my point. People do that. I'm provoking. I'm trying to provoke something. I'm trying to say things are more complicated than what it seems. Chicanx means people of Mexican descent who have been in this country, not the most recent people, but people who've been here for a while. Some of them don't even speak Spanish. They've been so much. And I will tell you, most of them don't use that label. Like somebody was complaining about Latinx. You heard people say Latinx. Well, most people don't say that. I go, yeah, but people didn't say Latino that long ago. You know what I'm saying? Everybody's always giving us labels. Hispanic, that's a made up thing. All of it is like everybody calls you everything. So I'm just saying, I'm gonna call myself something. You know what I'm saying? I'm gonna claim something. That's what I'm doing. I'm going against the whole grain because everybody's putting labels on me and saying who I am. I'm just claiming myself for what I wanna be. And I do think it's important to be inclusive of the gender non-conforming communities in our communities, because I've seen the pain they've suffered in our communities. You know, Mexicans, just like most African Americans, just like most people, are very conservative, culturally in all kinds of ways. People don't think they're not. The only reason that they're even progressive is because they keep getting slammed down. If Mexicans weren't being discriminated against so much, they would probably be right along with everybody else. But they get put down so much. My family was all conservative. My family now, they're in Idaho. Why did they move to Idaho? Because they can't live in LA. They're poor, they're working class, they don't got no college education, but they're conservative church people. And they told them there's a big move. They said, we go to Idaho, get away from the liberal Los Angeles. So now Idaho's got all these Christians, conservative Christians living there from LA. Yeah, a lot of them. And now they're pissed off because they're ruining Idaho. You know, the traffic is getting bad, the rents are getting high. So in other words, all this is just provoking. I'm trying to get to something deeper. I have a deeper roots. All the layers of colonial domination that makes Mexicans, Chicanos, everything else, I'm going all the way down to the deepest roots. I'm not denying any of it because it's all nested. You know what I'm saying? I can say I'm American, I can say I'm all these things, I can go all the way down, but I have these roots, it's nested. So if I say that, it just provokes people to think about what are labels, who are we? Maybe we don't even need them. I'm actually like, why should we even have labels? You know what I'm saying? But you have the labels to kind of provoke the idea that maybe we shouldn't even think about them. We shouldn't even have them. Hope I'm making sense.
It is very interesting.
I'm not trying to,
Very interesting, I think, how it relates to, and most people in university, right, come from various traditions, various backgrounds. You're trying to figure out, what do you want to be, right, for your identity? I mean, what do you draw from as you choose your identity, which is going to be something of a dance between where you've come from, the tradition, like your roots, where they are, how you read them, where you are now dealing with reality, and what you wish to be, right? So these are all big questions I think you're addressing in significant ways. But I wonder if we can come back to a question, and it relates to some laws that Jerry Brown was a part of helping see through. They're related to criminal justice reform. Prop 47, Prop 57, which were a part of responding to the Supreme Court. Justice Kennedy's sort of mandate that California needs to
overcrowding,
its prison population. But you actually, one of the things that it didn't address is sort of turned a lot of drug felonies into misdemeanors, but it never addressed the issue of violent crime. It's like, well, you can have a commuted sentence if you didn't do a violent crime. And I want to bring up something that we had in a previous conversation last week where I asked you what were the key problems in Los Angeles.
Yeah.
And you said homelessness, mental health, and different from your counterpart, Freddie Negretti, when we were in that conversation. And then you said violence.
Yeah.
And I wonder we're still stigmatizing violent crime, which could be several things. But it seems like we're never going to have any meaningful criminal justice reform unless we address that issue. And let me bring up an example. We had a previous governor, George Pardee, who late 19th century was releasing a lot of people. There were a lot of people coming to California in the late 19th century who weren't the most desirable people to have. They would jump on trains.
They was the Wild Wild West.
Yeah, they commit some crime in Ohio or somewhere, jump on a train, come out to California and try to reinvent themselves when they were wanted for murder or whatever. And so they would come out here, and a lot of these people were filling the prisons in the late 19th century. Now, there was a moment where these prisons, Folsom, San Quentin, were overcrowded, and so the parole board was was letting a lot of people out. Yeah. But there was some political public backlash, and the governor issued a letter. I've shown this to not this group of students, but some of my students, where the governor issued a letter, and he says, okay, we need to slow that down. It's in the state archives. We need to slow down the releasing of these people. And then he gives a qualification and says, now, we know, though, that most murderers are not like regular criminals, liars, scoundrels, thieves, and sort of uses these terms. And then comes back and says, we know that murderers are some of the most exemplary folks in prison. Right? They sort of, I guess they mean business. They're, but that so relates to something of an understanding of at least at that point, checks and balances maybe, that violent crime.
I think it really started in Chicago, and it went over to us in New York eventually when Jane Addams came up with the idea that you can't just put these people away. Again, she was putting forward, she created these settlement houses so that communities, and primarily for white immigrants that were getting into a lot of trouble. As you know, white immigrants, Irish, German, Eastern European, were getting a lot of trouble in these communities, Italian. They were poor, poverty, but they were able to rise up because there was always black people that they can say was lower than them. They could always step on black people no matter what. The Irish were treated really badly, but they never were treated as badly as black people. And they even, some of them, as you know, being Irish, some of them joined with the anti-black stuff, some didn't. But the point being that they wanted to say, can we help these people instead of, Charles Dickens and all these people put forward from England, the industrial world was creating crime. They knew that it was tied to industry, so then they figure out, okay, these aren't really criminals in the sense of they're just bad people. They're people because the jobs aren't there, because the jobs are pressuring people, because some people can see, why am I killing myself to work for nothing? Let me steal better and I get more, So
they need to eat. Their families need to eat.
They got to eat. So the settlement houses ideas and the idea that maybe we don't have to imprison them as much was going around, and I think it went all the way down here. And again, I don't know about that particular governor, but I get the idea because I always tell people when there was white immigrants, they were prepared to help. Now, in the 20th century, when there became more people of color, all of a sudden those ideas went out the door. Let's just put them away. They ain't no good. They're never going to get it. You're never going to change. You got to put them away for a long, long time. And it got really bad in the last few years, like in the 90s, got really bad. Even Democrats fell into it. These people cannot change. We got to give them years and years of time. When kids were being tried as adults, they were given 135 years they were just 14 or 16 years old, whatever it is, given a lot of years. And because they were already like going back to the whole idea that you can't change nothing. And they weren't justifying it by looking at the economy. They were just saying, something's wrong with these people, put them away. So they were creating monsters, as I say in my book. They were monsters of our own making. We created these monsters. We made them. And now we don't know what to do except that they're monsters. And so I think that's what happened. It started permeating the last few years. Remember the super predators, the youth that were gone.
So and crime is increasing, is overwhelmingly stigmatized.
But it really happened when majority of the so-called criminals were people of color. More than when it was mostly whites. Now when it was mostly black and brown, they were like losing it. And so they went and put all these laws, and people, I go to the prison now, there's guys serving their whole lives in prison who would never commit a crime again, who are actually quite decent. I tell my wife, I have I do 13 or 15 week classes. So every 13, 15 weeks I have a new group of guys. In the B yard, which is the general population yard, there's about 30 guys, tattooed faced, all buff, even though there's no weight, they find a way to work out. They scare the heck out of anybody. My wife, she never done this work, so you would walk in there, you'd be scared to death. But I will tell you, I do this a regular, I work with them, and some of them, over the course of a little bit of time, you find out they're quite decent human beings. I hope you understand what I'm saying. Almost all those guys are murderers there. Most of them are LWOP, which means life without possibility of parole. Some have been doing 30, 40 years. Former gang members, there's a lot of street gang stuff going on, but I'm working with them now, and I find a lot of decency, a lot of people that want to make some changes, some of them are never getting out, and they still want to make changes.
They read an interview that Bidan Chandra Roy, an English professor at Cal State LA, did with Ten Nguyen in Boone, California, and which reflects on his own experience as a Vietnamese gangster who's now doing life in Lancaster. This has been profoundly rich for me having this conversation, but I'm aware that you all may have some pressing conversations that you would like to have in the next 15 minutes or so that we have together. Would anybody venture a question?
And you can challenge me for sure.
Yes.
How'd you get out of the gang life?
So that's a very good question, because I think that it's a way that a lot of people can get out. I was not a lightweight gang member. I was not, a wannabe. I was heavily involved. I got involved when I was 11 years old. At 12, I got involved with heroin. At 13, I was getting arrested. I've been in jails in East LA, San Gabriel Valley, different communities, as well as juvenile hall, and I was in 2 adult facilities. My crimes were very violent. I was on murder's row when I was 16, and then I was arrested for attempted murder when I was 17. But by 18, 19, believe it or not, I was done. I hope you understand what I'm saying. I'm done with that life. I had wrapped myself up in la vida loca, the crazy life. I had become wound up in it. I had no more life for me. All my friends were killed. I lost 25 friends by the time I was 18. I had no more friends. My family had threw me out when I was 15. I had no more family. I had nowhere to go except I couldn't stay there. And I was facing state prison time, and I was prepared to go by getting out of heroin. Why would I do that? Because heroin is one of the ways that anybody can own you. You know what I'm saying? I knew that. If I'm going to prison, I'm not going to go as a heroin addict, because I didn't want to be owned by these guys. I don't know if you know what I'm talking about. The Mexican mafia guys, all these prison guys. I didn't know what, I'm going to do things on my own.
And you're talking about early mid-70s.
Yeah, I didn't like the way the gangs were being made into one giant prison thing. I didn't like it.
That's when the war on crime is in full swing,
Yeah,
of course.
it was really bad. So I was prepared to leave, and if I didn't have any mentoring and people who work with me, I wouldn't have made it. People who wanted to help. There was a Chicano movement that pulled in a lot of us into getting away, thinking that we could imagine ourselves out of the gang. I didn't have that. I had that, and that was good. So I tell people I wasn't scared straight, because I was prepared to die. I was prepared to get shot. I didn't care. I shot people. I stabbed people. I was prepared to do all that stuff. I was cared straight. You understand? People cared for me, and that helped me to the point that I made my decisions sitting in the county jail the last time. And these people wrote letters on my behalf, went to the judge, worked on my behalf, so the judge didn't give me the state prison term. He gave me time served in the county jail, got convicted, did the county jail time, and I walked out, and I never looked back. Never went back to jail, never went back to heroin. I started my heroin withdrawals in the county jail, and then I finished them later on, and I never went back to gang violence. I've been away from that for over 45 years. So to me, it was that kind of, I would have to say, it developed mentally maturity that some people takes 30, 40 years to get to. Some of us got it sooner, you know what I mean? And that's where I was at. You know.
Susan Burton also talks about this, right?
I know Susan,
why in and out, and the wonderful things she's done for women getting out of prison. And she says the only thing that changed her was somebody helped her.
Yeah.
Somebody helped her.
Yeah.
Other questions? Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
John?
So my dad has 2 strikes on him, and he hasn't been able to drive, get a cell phone, get a job for like the past 30 years or something like that. How can we help, like, just enter these ex-offenders back into like
Yeah.
being like productive members of society, where they may have a chance to just gain some sort of upward mobility, so they're not kind of stuck to the time where right before they went to prison.
Yeah. We're working on that now. There's a lot of reentry, reintegration programs, which has never used to happen before, but now everybody's realizing, because California had some of the worst recidivism rate. 70 to 70%, 75% of prisoners would go back because of that. It kind of sets you up to fail. The parole board was always messing with you, not the parole board, but the parole agent, goading you on. Then you couldn't get a decent job, and family members were like, "I don't want to work with this guy."
And so all these programs as well, and
they made it so difficult that my son did 15 years in prison, and he had a hard time. He's still having a hard time. He's been out of prison for 10 years, and he's still having a hard time reintegrating. He's 45 years old now. He spent all his 20s and 30 and up to 35. He got out at 35 years old. All that period he was stuck in prison, and now he's barely now trying to get it together. Like I said, now he's got a job as a driver because now they've opened up the felons. So it's beginning to change. But absolutely, what you're saying is true. If somebody gets out and they want to change, and you don't give them the openness and the opportunity and the skills and the training, whatever they need, you're setting them up to fail. And that, to me, is what we do. It's not so much that these guys, of course, I always tell the guys, don't play into it. don't play yourself, But if you can, let's change the conditions so that we don't lose as many of these guys. The women stuff is even worse because they have no programming. Women don't even get to see anything. And most of them aren't even as violent as the men. Most of them are drug cases or women, domestic violence stuff, But that's what's beginning to change now, barely.
Yes.
What drove you to deviate from the law?
Very easy. I say it's easy because it wasn't my whole family. I was the only one in my family that joined a gang and got into heroin. Nobody else did. It wasn't everybody in the barrio. Most people in the barrio are not in gangs, in spite of people think everybody in the worst neighborhoods, Watts, whatever. Most of them are not. But what made it easy for me was, if you have enough empties in your family, in yourself, and in the community, a gang is a good place to fill those empties. I hope I'm making sense. I was very estranged from the world. I was bullied by everybody. I couldn't speak Spanish in the classrooms because in those days they would swat you if you spoke Spanish. I couldn't be Mexican. I couldn't be American. I couldn't fit anywhere. Guess what? I saw these cholos. You know what a cholo is, I saw these guys dressed so wild and crazy and with respect, people respect, they were tough, they were warriors. I wanted that because I didn't have any of that, you know what I'm saying? I didn't have a father that guided me, like, this is what it takes to be a man, I didn't have anything, so these were the guys that became my teachers, my mentors, and my destruction. You see what I'm saying? I fell into all that, and I thought it was the best thing going. And I found out soon enough, it wasn't. But that takes that kind of effort.
Now, being a gang member, though, because she asked the question about the law, right, which is a reflection of culture and values. And Jonathan Simon from Berkeley has said, I've heard him say from the law school, that law is actually a subset of theology. Now, so if it's a reflection of these values, and now again, being a gang member is not necessarily illegal. They're reading about prison gangs now.
And most guys in gangs aren't criminals. That's the other thing. There's a hardcore group of guys that they maybe make it bad for everybody. There's a lot of guys. My neighborhood had a lot of guys in the barrio. They weren't all criminals. Some of them didn't want anything to do with it, but they were still cholo. Being cholo didn't mean you were going to be a criminal. Yeah, and then you had these hardcore guys.
But if you were on a list and did commit a crime, these gang injunctions, like it was.
And then what happened is they started criminalizing people that weren't. In other words, a lot of these guys were not criminals, but they were making them criminals. Right. I know a lot of guys with the gang injunctions were being stopped for having tattoos, and then they were getting criminalized when they weren't.
Yeah, because stop and frisk.
They started to expand it. But when I was growing up, breaking the law, okay, this is why I felt. I felt that everybody else was criminal and thieves and liars, getting away with it. In the gang, even though they were doing criminal things, I felt they had their word. There were more palabra. You know what I'm saying? You could trust these guys more, which is sad. I couldn't trust people in the church. I couldn't trust people that had these jobs. I couldn't trust my own father. You know what I'm saying? These people were living in a nice, cool world, but they were all liars and thieves. But they were getting away with it. I hope you know what I'm saying. My dad molested my sisters. He was getting away with it. You understand what I'm saying? Nobody stopped him, the fool. I couldn't stop him. I saw so many hypocrisies. I remember going to the church, and but the church that I was in, they treat you like dirt. There was all these really mean, in those days, there are a lot of good nuns now, a lot of good priests, but in those days they were very mean and ugly, and they would swat you all the time, hit you. You know what I'm saying? Every little thing you did was bad. And there was so much abuse, not just sexual, but also physical. And the schools were terrible. They're terrible. They had your history wasn't there. You didn't know who you were. Nobody was telling your story. They were treating you bad. If you spoke Spanish, they punished you. I felt these people are no good. And the only ones that embraced me, and I have to tell you that's the way I felt, well, the only ones that embraced me was the gang. I had a big chin because I got jumped at 9 years old, and they cracked my jaw. They didn't break it, and it got crazy. So everybody made fun of me. The gang embraced me. My gang name was Chin. They embraced who I was. Now, here's the problem with that. It's a trap, too. You know what I'm saying? I didn't know it at the time. It becomes a trap. Here, now do heroin. Now steal. Now you got to get a gun. Now you got to shoot people. I'm falling into this trap now. And then I began to realize, wow, it isn't just these people who are messed up. Even these people who I thought they weren't, or were even more messed up. You know what I'm saying? But they start controlling everything you do. That's what I couldn't stand. My struggle since 18, 19, 20 years old was I don't want to be controlled by anybody. See what I'm getting at? What a struggle that was, because I turned everything over to the gang. I turned everything over to heroin. I turned everything, I didn't have nothing for me. So then you kind of weigh all these things, and then you realize there are some essential ways of being. And I tell this to the guys in prison, you want to learn to be a decent, honest human being. You know what I'm saying? That's the whole goal of every religion as far as I'm concerned. And everybody in the world is to get there, but most people aren't. And you can't use that as an excuse not to be that. You know what I'm saying? Can't say, all these people are messed up. I can be messed up. All of us have to struggle to be decent, honest, wonderful, amazing, elaborate, and imaginative human beings. That's the struggle all of us have to get through.
Yeah.
So you mentioned like drugs and stuff, and we know that abuse and use is funneling people into the prison system.
Yeah.
You talk about like care and resources. I was wondering what kind of future you envision as an alternative to punishment for drug use.
Well, Europe is leading the way in this, and people don't talk about it, but Europe is doing a lot of innovative things with drugs. They do not criminalize you if you're a drug user. I've been to places in Germany and in Italy and even in Spain, and not so much in England, but some in England, where if you're a drug addict, they give you needles that are clean. You can actually get them on the parks. They have little things because they want you to have clean needles. So when I was growing up, it wasn't clean. And then when you use the drugs, generally it's all mixed in with a bunch of junk. I don't know if you know heroin or anything. They have to cut it up with a bunch of other stuff so that they make it last, but you don't know what you're putting up in your veins. What they do is you can go to a hospital and get real heroin, good amount, with clean needles, and they'll let you shoot it up there. And you think that's terrible? But guess what? It keeps them healthy, keeps them safe, and right next door, there's a door. If you want to get out of it, you can get treatment. It doesn't cost them anything. How come Europe can do that? How come the rest of us can't do it here? How come we're so ugly about people who can't help? I was on heroin for 7 years. After a while, you're like a zombie. You're not even real no more. I couldn't even stop it. You see what I'm saying? Somebody had to give me the tools to stop it, otherwise I wouldn't do it. And I think we can do that. We don't have to criminalize people who can't help but be who they are. We can teach them, we can hold them, we can give them knowledge, awareness. We can do so much. They do it in Europe, and maybe at different levels, but I've seen it do it, and it works. They don't stigmatize anybody. Now in Europe, you can't bring in drugs. You can't be a drug dealer. You know, you can still get in prison for, doing all that. But if once you are a drug addict, they don't stigmatize you, and you can get through it. They have a stable level of drug use as compared to the U.S., which gets worse every year.
That's interesting. So even if society, medicine say, ethicists and so on would say this is wrong, societally they're still dealing with ontology, the reality, and the dignity and worth of human beings, of individual human beings, which seems a different way than we've done things.
The worst thing is when you're in the street trying to get drugs and you're having to steal just to try to make it, and then you're having to take the crazy drugs that they got in the street, which mostly is no good. In other words, we throw it into the street, we're ruining people's lives. Now with fentanyl, which started off as a pharmaceutical thing, a lot of those companies have been pulled out. They made billions of dollars by giving people Oxycontin and all this other stuff. Now they have to do it from Mexico. They bring it up, and it's all bad stuff and everything. But guess what? We're not creating the conditions to help people. All we do is create conditions to make more addicts. Yeah.
I thought, was there one other question? Yes, you had your hand up for a while. So.
You mentioned your family, like once you started getting involved in the gang life, they kind of like cut you off, or like you said they kicked you out.
Yeah.
If you were able to make amends with them, like how was that process and how it affected your development?
For one thing, I don't blame them. I totally get it. I needed to be pushed out of the house. And my mom did it because she didn't want me to infect my brothers and sisters. From that viewpoint, she says, I lost one, I don't want to lose any more. You know what I'm saying? They're Mexican, hardworking people. They have no, they're all they know is working, and they couldn't see me being, I was a poison in the family. And I get it. I totally get it. It wasn't cool that I was in the street and I was homeless and I couldn't, but it was fine in the sense that it was my fault. You know what I'm saying? And I get why she was trying to do that. But one thing that I learned, I never could have a good amends with my father. Never could. And never to the day he died, I could never get together. I didn't talk to him for like 30, 40 years. But my mom, I had to. And my mom was the hardest on me. My dad was a very detached, emotionless person. He was very cold, frio, as we used to call it. He didn't really get involved in my life. When I was in trouble, he just walked away. All I remember is the back of his head. He wouldn't get into helping me. Just the back of his head is all I could see. And his thing was, you do what we say, get out. That's easy, I'm out, you know what I mean? He didn't give me no options, no rules. And my mom was trying. She was very upset, but I think she cared. She didn't know how to, you know how it is, you don't know how to help a crazy kid. I've been there, I have my son. My son was like that for me, like, oh my God, my own son went through it. But I had my amends with my mom. I had to. Before she died, she had lymphoma, and then she got Alzheimer's. And before she was gonna forget me, I needed to go to her and tell her, I know, can we come together? And it was really good, it was beautiful, it had to be done. I'm glad I could do it, but it took me 30 some years before I could do it. See what I'm saying? So that's what happens. I'm glad that I did reconcile with my mom, but it was hard, it was really hard.
Sort of brings us back to the local situation, right? The family and alternative ways of sort of re-envisioning, reimagining in this eloquent way. I love what your hat says, saved by a story. And of course, this is just a taste of Luis. We're just out of time now, but of course his new book, From Our Land to Our Land, Essays, Journeys, Imaginings from a Native Chicanx Writer, is what several of you are going to be reading for extra credit in this class. So I hope you enjoy that. And let's thank Luis for his time with us.
Yeah. Thank you all. Thank you. Thank you.
Okay, we still got discussion, but we'll be back Tuesday. If you did bring a copy of your book, I'm sure Luis probably would be willing to sign it for you.
Absolutely.
We'll need to sign mine. We just got a few minutes before we got to roll out.